Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Andy Snyder. I'm a part of the IFA's conferences team. It's great to be with you today and welcome you to our second GenieCast. We hope you already have registered for the IFA convention, but if you haven't, please make sure to do so today by visiting franchise.org. One reminder about this GenieCast: if you have questions during the cast, please make sure to type them in the chat box. So now let's get started. We're thrilled to have with us today Greg Nathan. He's the founder of the Franchise Relationships Institute. He's a registered psychologist, best-selling author, and a widely recognized thought leader on managing franchise relations. Hi, Greg. We organized this session today to give people a taste of what they can expect at the Franchise Relations Summit, which will be a part of the 2018 IFA convention. Can you tell us about this summit and how it works?
Yeah. Hi, Andy, and hello, everyone. So one of the IFA's consultative groups is the Franchise Relations Committee, and that's currently chaired by Mitch Cohen. And for the last few years, the committee's coordinated an interactive summit on a topic that we know is hot for franchisees and franchisors. The last summit was on improving franchise communications and group meetings. Some of the people on the call today may have been in that summit. And would you believe that the participants generated 176 best practice tips based on their real life experience? So if anyone is interested, they were collated and we've made them available on the IFA's French Social Forum.
So this summit is always highly rated by our attendees. So what do you think people get? Why do you think people get so much value?
Yeah, well, look, it comes back, Andy, to the power of people sharing their experience. There's an enormous amount of experience within the IFA from franchisor executives, franchisees and suppliers. And what we do in these summits is we tap into that expertise. We give everyone the opportunity to share and discuss what works for them. And there is a psychology behind this. It's that we all tend to be happiest when we're engaged in a learning process that respects our experience. So the Franchise Relations Summits are designed to give everyone that chance, not just to learn from the panelists and other people, but to also contribute their experience. And I'm sure everyone in our session today will have seen this at their own conferences and meetings where franchisees are sharing their experience. And this type of interactive learning, it's not just a lot more fun, but it delivers a far better return on people's time and energy.
So tell us about next year's summit. The topic is maintaining relevant support throughout the franchisee journey.
Yeah. So one exciting aspect of the next summit is that the Franchise Relations Committee has actually teamed up with the IFA's Franchisee Forum and Franchisor Forums. And we've put our heads together and come up with, I think, is one of the most important topics in franchising today. And that's providing relevant support to franchisees, because all franchisees are going to go through a journey. They're going to have different support needs. And our research actually shows that this journey is going to last for more than 7 years. And in some cases, and I'm sure many people on the call today will have franchisees that have been with them for 20 years or even 30 years. Now, the journey has two aspects. There's a personal journey, and this is related to how the franchisee feels about their franchisor and their relationship with the franchisor. And there's a business journey related to the support that they need from the franchisor as their business grows.
That's very interesting. So can you tell us a little bit more about that personal journey?
Yeah, okay. So you'll see up on the screen there, what I call the franchisee factor. And I developed this 25 years ago. It plots the stages that franchisees go through in their relationship with the franchisor. And this is very real, and it's based on a lot of psychology, a lot of research that was conducted. And the vertical axis represents their happiness with their relationship, and the horizontal axis represents their tenure. And you'll see that franchisees are at their happiest in the initial stage of the relationship. So we call this the glee stage. And as they start to ruminate on the fees they're paying their franchisor, the glee wears off. One franchisee actually wrote in a survey, "My franchisor used to treat me like royalty, now I feel like I'm treated like royalties. I think that's beautiful. So we call this the fee stage. And then they start attributing their growing confidence and success to their own efforts, and they may tend to play down the franchisor's contribution. So we call this like the me stage, all about me. And they may even blame the franchisor if things aren't going so well. And this is actually quite natural. In psychology, we call it the self-serving bias. It's where we attribute our own genius and hard work to the good things that happen to us, and we attribute others' lack of effort or incompetence. It's about you when bad things happen. And in many ways, the franchise relationship is like other interdependent relationships in life, like marriage. And that's probably why it's sometimes likened to a commercial marriage. You can't just walk away if things aren't going the way that you want to.
So what happens next?
Okay, well, as you can see, the relationship does get worse before it gets better. Things are most strained when the franchisee tries to test out what they can and can't get away with. And if anyone's got teenage kids, they'll know what this feels like. So we call this the free stage, the franchisees wanting to kind of break free a little bit. And this is where trust gets tested. It's why franchisor executives need to practice great listening and relationship management skills so they can get the relationship back on track, onto a more positive footing. Now, in most cases, a frank and honest discussion with quality listening on both sides is going to move the relationship to what we call the C stage, where people are more likely to understand each other's needs and see each other's perspectives. And the final we stage represents a maturing of the relationship where both parties understand that it's really about collaboration, and that's how we get a competitive advantage and we achieve long-term success for the network. And it's interesting, when you look at the meaning of that word collaboration, co means with and labour means to work. So at the we stage, the franchisee decides to work with rather than against the franchisor. And this can be a big breakthrough in the relationship. But for this to happen, the franchisor team needs to earn the respect of the franchisees by being competent, caring, and consistent. They're three very important aspects of leadership, and we call this leading with credibility.
So are you saying that all franchisees go through this personal E-Factor journey?
Yep, I am. But to a greater or lesser extent. It is an individual thing. And some people are going to experience mild frustration and disappointment, and then they're quickly going to get over that and get on with their business. Others can get stuck, and we can find people, with these deep feelings of resentment and anger. And that can be destabilizing, actually, for themselves, their staff, and the people around them. I personally had this, actually, when I was a franchisee. I got stuck for a while.
Well, I know you're going to talk next about how franchisors can support their franchisees through the business journey, but I thought we might take a few questions at this point. We had a few that were submitted before we started. So the first question, how do I best re-engage a discouraged franchisee?
All right. Well, we all get discouraged from time to time when we're taking on challenges in life. And I think the first thing, it's very helpful to name it in a respectful way about what's going on. And in that case, you might say to the person, I noticed you seem a bit discouraged recently. And what we find when you name an emotion or something that you see about someone's behavior that doesn't seem quite right, it tends to bring the discussion into the present. And it really can give you a great breakthrough. And this will often get them talking about how they're feeling. So listen carefully to what they're saying, empathize with it, and you may paraphrase back to them. So you're saying that you are really disappointed about the lack of support or whatever it is they're saying. And then you need to move that conversation forward using some solution-focused questions. So you might then say, so what do you think would help to give you more support then? And we call this doing a NEMO, Andy. It's called name, empathize, and move on.
Very interesting. I think I'll use that in my own life too.
Yeah.
How long does it typically take then for a franchisee to get into that free stage? There's our next question.
Yep. Okay. Great. Often get asked this. Look, our research shows that on average, that dip into the free stage usually kicks in. This is on average. We're talking about thousands and thousands of franchisees, about 3 to 5 years. But for some people, they're going to move quickly into that. Some people can stay in the glee stage for 5 years, and then something will trigger them to become disappointed or disillusioned. I had one franchisee, he moved from glee to free in 3 minutes after he'd signed the franchise agreement. We were at loggerheads.
That's great. And then the last question for now is, what is one tip for franchisors on how they can use their franchise advisory council to improve that franchisor-franchisee relation?
Yes. Look, franchise advisory councils can be a double-edged sword if they're not managed well. But I'll give you 2 tips. So the first tip is that you need to have a clear statement of purpose that the Franchise Advisory Council is all about finding opportunities to improve franchisee profitability. It's there to enhance the brand, protect the brand, and it's there to build a healthy culture. And I think we need to keep coming back to that, because they can flip into gripe sessions if people forget what's the purpose of us being here. And the second thing is, our research clearly shows that the caliber and the competence of the chairperson makes all the difference. So have a good chairperson running those meetings. And I think it also helps to give franchisees, if they're chairing those meetings, some training in facilitation skills, because it's not something that comes naturally to everybody.
Great. I just had one question pop up that I thought might be another one to add in here. Somebody asked the question, would you share that chart with new franchisees during onboarding?
Absolutely. And you may even give them that to aspire towards and say, look, once you get your head around the business, this will probably going to take you a few years. We'd like to see you on the Franchise Advisory Council at some stage, and this is what the Franchise Advisory Council is all about. But that charter should be available for everybody to see. And I would recommend that every second or third meeting you bring it out and you read through it together and just go through the main points to keep us all on track.
Great. So can you tell us now about what people can expect to learn at the Franchise Relations Summit?
Yeah, up to. So we've talked now about the personal journey. I'd like to now take us all through the business journey, and that's because that's going to be the focus of the summit in February. Now you'll see up on the screen what's called the Sigmoid Curve, and all journeys in life actually look like this. We could be talking about a product life cycle, a living thing. When I've got a little puppy dog and he's going to go through this, I'm going to go through this. We all do. So it's called the Sigmoid Curve. There's going to be an initial struggle as we get going and we overcome the inertia of getting going and working through initial teething problems. Then there's going to be growth. And then at some stage, nothing is forever. Things are going to plateau out. And finally, there is going to be a decline. Now, the initial dip, it's a useful reminder that things usually get worse before they get better. And Charles Handy is a business philosopher who wrote a book in the 1990s called The Empty Raincoat. And he raised this issue of the sigmoid curve and how it relates to business. So he calls the dip the struggle. Joe Matthews, a colleague of mine, has written an excellent book called Street Smart Franchising. And in that book, Joe calls it the grind. We call it the perspiration stage. And based on our research into the franchisee journey, we've actually come up with 6 stages, which I'm going to now overlay onto the sigmoid curve. So you'll see them up on the screen now.
So there are also 6 stages for this franchisee business journey.
There are. So I'm just getting my screen adjusted here. So we've got, investigation, initiation, perspiration, consolidation, maturation, and reformation. And as you can see, to get to reformation, we need the franchisee to start a new curve. And this is it's almost like a reinvention process. And at the summit in February, we're going to have panels of experienced franchisor executives and franchisees who are going to talk about what useful support looks like at each of these 6 stages And then we're going to get participants an opportunity to share their experience on what works for them in relation to supporting franchisees at each of these stages, because the support needs do change, particularly at the maturation stage and the reformation stages, because this is where actually the majority of franchisees are at.
That sounds really interesting. So we get to hear the views of top performing people, and then the audience actively participates in sharing their experience.
Yeah.
It would be great if you could share a bit more about what the franchisees need at these different stages.
Sure. Okay. So up on the screen now, you'll see we're starting off on the investigation stage, and at this stage, the prospective franchisee is going to be assessing various business opportunities. Yours is not going to be the only one they're looking at. And they're really asking this question: is this business right for me? What many franchise or development executives fail to recognise is that the franchisee's expectations are now being set based on the discussions that you're having with them and what they read and hear. And these expectations are going to stay with them for the rest of their journey. And I mentioned earlier, this is likely to be well past 7 years. So it's also vital. Another thing I think is critical is that a franchise or development team has a checklist of attributes for assessing prospective franchisees. And I'll give you an example of some of these attributes. In our research, we've found that attributes such as an optimistic outlook to life, business acumen and enjoyment of reading figures and analysing metrics, brand passion. I'm not just buying this business just for something to do. I love the product and I love what it does for the community. And another important attribute is proactivity. And proactivity is that tendency to make things happen. These are important attributes for later success.
So what you're saying is that even though the franchisee hasn't even yet formally signed a franchise agreement, their experience at this investigative stage has a big impact on their later business journey.
Yes, absolutely. So let's now move on and see what happens next. And we're going to look at the initiation stage. And this occurs after the signing of the franchise agreement. So they're now being inducted into your culture. They're being educated about your brand, and they're being trained in your business systems. And while an important part of initiation involves developing skills and getting franchisees into good habits, this stage is called initiation because really we are initiating them into your culture and into what your brand reputation is all about. And as I said earlier, for instance, brand passion is a big predictor of franchisee performance and satisfaction. So if nothing else, at this stage, give them lots of reasons to feel passionate about your brand.
So I can see from the chart, franchisee would be going through a dip. So how does the franchisor best support them at this stage?
Yes, well, the development and the training departments may have done a great job in getting the franchisee prepped and enthused, but the journey is now about to take on an interesting twist because the franchisee is about to face the realities of running the business. And here up on the screen, welcome to the perspiration stage. So we now have the challenge of growing sales, building a base of loyal customers, dealing with difficult customers, unreliable staff, long hours, unpredictable cash flow. We've all seen this. And, they're also now going to be moving from a state of unconscious incompetence where they didn't know what they didn't know. And now they're in what we could call a state of conscious incompetence where they realise just how much more they've got to learn. And because of that, their confidence can take a hit. And so the franchisor team needs to provide lots of encouragement and practical support at this stage to get the franchisee into good habits, particularly around the basics of running the business.
So it looks like things start to then get a lot better. Does this mean the franchisor can now just leave the franchisee to their own devices?
Yeah, look, things do start to get a lot better as the franchisee moves into the consolidation stage. And a lot of franchisors, unfortunately, do now leave the franchisee to their own devices. And this is actually a mistake because it can create frustration for the franchisee who may now think that they're not getting any value for their fees. So remember before we talked about the E factor and the glee stage and the free stage. So I'm just going to overlay that up on the slide there. So as their performance is going up, their satisfaction can start to go down at this stage. And here you can see the fee stage. And so while they're starting to build, the business and their confidence is going up and they're getting on top of things, they're also going to start to challenge you on the quality of your support and what you're doing for them. So the good news, though, is that at the consolidation stage, everything's coming together for your franchisees. They're probably now moving through the break-even stage and they're making money. And they can now step back. They can work more on the business rather than in the business, review their goals, and really understand, the drivers of profitability. This is where they really understand how the business works and what creates more profit. And really at this stage, huge opportunity for the franchisor to step in with them rather than step away and work with them on improving their metrics and helping them, to improve productivity and systems.
That sounds like a great place for a business to be. But as you said before, nothing is forever. So what happens next?
Yeah, well, welcome to the golf course. So the word maturation implies that something's fully developed. It's ready for the next stage, like a ripe banana sometimes. So the maturation stage describes both the person and also the maturity of their business. And we're likely now to be 6 to 8 years down the track. The mature franchisee, she's probably been toughened up. They've had trials and tribulations of running the business. They may be a little bit like a seasoned veteran. They may feel, that they now deserve to enjoy the fruits of their work and sit back a little bit. They've probably seen numerous field consultants come and go, I'm here to help you, and go, oh yeah, here's another one. They've had probably several leaders, in the franchisor team coming along, rolling out a raft of new initiatives that are going to change the world. Some of these may have been more successful than others. So there can be a little bit of, maybe not cynicism, but skepticism towards new ideas. And they might want to spend more time doing the things that they enjoy. They may even have become a bit tired, a bit bored, a bit complacent. Now, the problem with this is it can be, from a business perspective, very dangerous, because as we know, competitors are always going to be circling, trying to take away their market share. So we're going to get, if nothing happens, we're going to get this leveling out of performance and then a decline. And our research at the Franchise Relationships Institute, and also research by my colleague Eric Stites, I must say, Eric from the Franchise Business Review will be one of the panelists at the summit. And our research shows that over 50% of franchisees in North America are now in this maturation stage. So very interesting in terms of how we take them to the next level.
That is really interesting. So you're saying that franchisees can become a victim of their own success if they just continue to do what they've always been doing?
Absolutely. Look, it happens to all of us. I think one of the curses sometimes is winning awards. And we've seen franchisees, they win Franchisee of the Year award, and suddenly we see their performance start to drop off. They think they've arrived. So we need to work with the franchisee to start some sort of a reinvention process before the decline steps in. And the role of the franchisor at this stage is to inspire and maybe even provoke or challenge the franchisee to work out a reinvention or a succession plan. Charles Handy calls this the second curve. We call it the reformation stage. And ideally, this reformation stage should occur well before the decline sets in. And you can see it up there on the screen now. So a franchisee in the reformation stage is taking a decision. A conscious change. I want things to get better. And they may be reorganizing their business, restructuring their business. They may be moving or expanding into additional units. They may have brought on a young partner into the business as part of their succession plan, which I think is an excellent idea. But we should never underestimate that when you go through a reformation, we're going to find that there's going to be another dip, and there's going to be a lot of resources needed to make this change successful and move back into consolidation again. So it takes guts, it takes a little bit of humility and a lot of effort on the side of the franchisee to say, look, I am going to go through this reinvention stage. And the term that's often bandied around these days is having a growth mindset. And what that means is that people understand that you can't continue to grow if you don't put in the effort. But franchisees who do make the decision to go through the reformation will need to be supported with good planning and good mentoring. And it does help if you've got a mentor who's been through the process and can give you a few tips along the way.
So I did just get a question I thought would be interesting to share. So how can we help franchisees who want to go through the reformation stages?
Yes. Well, look, some people will naturally want to keep growing. These people naturally have a growth mindset. Other people, as I said, do get complacent. So you can do what I call put a pebble in the shoe a little bit and make them a little bit uncomfortable. We actually show this journey when we talk at franchise conferences. I was at a conference recently and I put this up, and a lot of the franchisees in that group are entering into multi-unit operations, and some of them are struggling. And seeing that, reminding them that things get worse before they get better, they found it actually inspiring and motivated them to keep going. So I think making the journey aware to them and reminding them that if they don't go through a reinvention, things can get quite bad for them, and maybe having a few war stories to share with them would be useful.
That's great. Thank you. So this is all really fantastic for the Franchise Relations Summit, something to really look forward to. And it's also practical.
Yeah. So I think this topic is something we're all going to be able to get our teeth into. Where initially, as I said earlier at the summit, we're going to draw on the experience of top franchisors and franchisees and advisors from a range of mature brands. So we'll have someone from Subway, Margaret from Right at Home, the head of operations, is going to be talking about performance groups. We'll have people from Money Mailer, Massage Envy, Alpha Graphics. They're going to share about how they support their franchisees, or if their franchisees, what they think is relevant support at these different stages. And then everybody in the audience is going to get the opportunity to share what they're doing to support their franchisees at these different stages. Or there'll be franchisees in the audience as well saying, well, this is what worked for me when I was going through these stages. And what we'll do as a bonus is we're going to collect all these best practices tips, and we're going to collate them and make them available to everybody. That's pretty much the franchisee business journey.
That's wonderful. Now I can see why you get such rave reviews at the summit. So I think we can take a few questions here. I have some questions from before and a few that I've received along the way. So let's see. How can we help longtime franchisees to maintain a growth mindset?
Yeah. So this was similar to the question earlier, that we show them the Sigmoid Curve at conferences. We get them to actually, you could even get them to chart where they think they are on this journey, and that can help them to think about what's coming up. Another thing that's useful is to get them to join a performance group. This is particularly when franchisees are maybe at that more mature phase. And Right at Home are seasoned veterans at running these performance groups. And as I said, Margaret Haynes, who's the head of operations, is going to talk about how they've instigated performance groups in their system and how it's really helped their more mature franchisees to get a new lease of life. So there's a few tips on that one.
Great. Another question that just came through as well, I think could be interesting, is how is the franchisee's journey affected by the maturity of the franchise company?
Yeah, great question. I must say, all the franchise or executives on the call today, I think we should all reflect on where we are in our companies on this journey. Unfortunately, we've been called in to work with clients occasionally that haven't reinvented themselves as a brand and as a franchise network and as a leadership team, and they're on the decline, and it's very difficult. The point is, when you're trying to go through a reinvention, when you're on that decline, it's triply hard because you're going to go through the dip. And if you don't have the resources up your sleeve to invest in and that extra energy and so on, sometimes you don't make it. So the franchisor needs to be role modeling this journey themselves. And I've been running my business, Andy, for 28 years now. And that's a long time to be running a business. And I can tell you, honestly, I am as enthusiastic today as I was when I started that business in 1989. And the reason is I've taken the Franchise Relationships Institute through a reformation now 6 times. And I think every business, whether it's the franchisor or the franchisee, needs to go through this process.
Great, thank you. One more, or not just one more, but the next. What tips and tricks do you have to best support multiple franchisees?
Yes, look, multi-unit franchisee, I love it. It's growing. We know that more than half of the franchising sector in Australia and also in North America are actually controlled by multi-unit franchisees. These are significant players, and they do have different needs to the single unit franchisees. Often they're needing coaching to become better leaders because some of these businesses may be responsible for 200 to 1,000 staff. In a sense, they're going from being a supervisor or a manager of a business to a CEO. Another area they need help with is often in getting across their metrics. So financial literacy, financial training, and good benchmarking systems are essential if you've got multi-unit operations there. A final tip also, because they've often got large numbers of staff, good HR management practices are essential. And often they say, they value help from the support office in terms of structuring and that side of the business, because managing large teams of people is quite complex. Now, I'm not saying you do the managing for them, but I think you're coaching and advising them on what good HR practices look like.
Thanks. I just had an interesting question come through from Tyler. He says, how can we best support our top performing franchisees that seem to not necessarily need help?
Yeah, well, look, I've got a few thoughts here. The first thing is most people love to share their experience. And when you share your own experience with other people, it reminds you that you haven't actually arrived. There's still more things that you need to learn. So putting them in positions where they can be mentors can be very motivating. I'll give you an example. Perhaps at a conference, you may get some of your more seasoned franchisees, high performers, into a panel. I think it's important these panels are facilitated well, but drawing them out on what they do and talking a little bit about their journey can be very satisfying for them. Performance groups, as I said earlier, absolutely magic in terms of keeping the more high-performing franchisees motivated and accountable, because it's like they've got a board of directors of their peers holding them accountable. Another thing that they appreciate is being recognised by having access to some of the more senior executives in the company. Some of our clients have a retreat every year. And if you achieve a certain level of performance, you may call it the President's Club, you may get the opportunity to go away on a retreat for 2 days with the senior executive team. And maybe there's a guest speaker who comes in and talks about leadership or psychology or science or the science of business. And that's also recognizing these people have achieved an elite level. And however, to keep attending these retreats, they need to maintain their performance. So there's a few tips around that.
Great, thank you. Another question that we received prior to the cast is there a good rule of thumb how many times per year a support person should visit an operating unit in a brick and mortar establishment?
I got to say, if there are field consultants on the call today, well done. The field consultant role is possibly the most important in terms of driving better performance. And we know that a good field consultant can make even up to 20% difference in performance of the region they're looking after. We've seen this again and again. But you've got to look at what you can afford as a franchisor, and you've got to cut your cloth accordingly, because you're going to be receiving a royalty fee from the franchisee's revenues. And some businesses are bringing in higher royalties and can afford to provide better support. So take that into account. But as a guide, I'd suggest 4 quality visits a year would be probably a good benchmark to shoot for. And that should be complemented by monthly video conversation on Zoom or Skype, or a monthly phone conversation, just to check in with the franchisee. Andy, just while we're on this question, I'm also often asked about ratios of field consultants to franchisees. And I'd say generally for bricks and mortar stores, 25, maybe up to 40 stores or units would be a reasonable ratio.
Great. Thank you. And another question around field support is any suggestions on how field support can help franchisees handle the stress of rising costs?
Wow. Look, we've just done a research project where we've looked at franchisee optimism and also pessimism. And, it's a little bit concerning, but a third of franchisees are starting to say they don't feel optimistic about the future. 2/3 do, but a third don't. And when we've dug in to look at why don't you feel optimistic about the future, and this is thousands and thousands of surveys that we've looked at, the biggest reason is margin compression. Now, margin compression is where your costs are going up, but your sales are staying the same or maybe even dropping back a little bit. And so your profit margin's being compressed. This is a big concern for franchisees, because a lot of them feel they're working harder and longer, but they're not getting that return on their effort and their energy that they used to. So I think we need to pay attention to the metrics, and every franchisee needs to know their break-even points, because if you know the point at which you start or stop making money, it reduces the uncertainty, and uncertainty creates stress and anxiety. So that would be my first tip. And if you don't know how to calculate a break-even point, Steve Lefevre in Profit Mastery runs courses on this. It's not that complicated to know that. The second thing is you need to be having regular financial discussions with them about their financial statements and identifying opportunities where they might be able to trim some costs or boost revenues in certain areas. And so financial literacy, equipping them in that, will build their confidence and will overcome some of that stress.
Great. I had another question just pop up. I think it's good. What about, I know there's lots. What about those franchisees who are very successful using everything you provided, then they become entitled that you didn't contribute to their success? Next comes that they don't feel that the royalties are worth it anymore.
Yeah, and that's very much that me stage I talked about. So the most difficult, but the most important thing is don't get defensive yourself and start to try and justify yourself. Listen to the franchisee with respect, and then you might say something in a very frank and honest way and say, that's really interesting that you have that perspective. I have a different view. Would it be okay if I shared that with you? So ask for their permission, and they're obviously going to say, well okay. You say, look, we've just invested like $500,000 in this new, whatever it is, this new IT system or this new training program, and we're getting some really good feedback. Has that not been useful for you? Because I do notice all your team have been using the online training system. Or don't you find the benchmarking that we're doing for you useful? Because you said you do. And so you just ask questions and get them to reflect on some of the things that you're providing, excuse me, and whether they do find it useful or not. And I think in a respectful way, just remind them of some of the services and tools that are available and how it's helping them. I found that useful, but you need to do it in a non-defensive way, more factual.
Great. Very good suggestions. Another one that kind of goes back to the visits, but I think is a good one that just came through. With 4 visits per year, how long would you suggest those visits be? Was it a couple of days? Is it a week? You're just looking for suggestions on how best to offer support.
As short as possible. But let me be more specific. You don't want to get into a sort of a robotic routine of just ticking boxes and doing things for the sake of it. So we mentioned earlier about the higher performers. I think you get in, you find out where are the opportunities to add value and do what you need to do, and then you get out as quickly as possible. These people have got businesses to run and they don't want to be hanging around talking to you and drinking coffee and so on just for the sake of it. However, if there is a genuine need for you to be there longer, then you need to be there longer, but you should know that ahead of time. So in setting up a visit, this is assuming it's not an unannounced visit. I'm talking about a business development visit. The franchisee should have shared with you what they want to talk about or get out of the visit, and you should have shared with them what you want to talk about and get out of the visit ahead of time. So we call this, a joint agenda, and then you can determine how much time. And when you first get to the business, before you get into, the nitty-gritty of talking about day-to-day operations and so on, just check in and say, okay, we've allocated 1 hour or 2 hours or 6 hours for our session together. Here's the things that you said you wanted to go through. Here's the things I wanted to go through. Are we still on track for this? So you might need to negotiate more or less time and then get into it and get through it as quickly as possible. And you will build credibility if you can be efficient and effective in what you do.
All right, great, thank you. And an interesting question just came through from Karen. And she wants to know, well, what do we do with the franchisees who are underperforming and are refusing support and coaching help?
Well, what are they doing there? I think I would ask, again, you need to be respectful, but I would do the Nemo technique that I mentioned earlier. And I would say, look, I need to talk with you. I have a concern here. You've invested a lot of money in this business. So this is just a fact that you're sharing with them. You've invested $500,000 or whatever it is, and you seem to be not spending as much time in the business as our other franchisees. And this just amazes me because I would have thought you would want this business to work. And every time I've come in and given you suggestions, you always tell me why it won't work or why I don't know what I'm talking about. And I just don't know what to do anymore, because if this continues, you're going to go broke. And this is a real concern for me. We don't want people going broke. And then I would pause at this point and let the franchisee step into the conversation, because you have just named the truth, but you've done it in a factual and a respectful way. So that's the naming part with empathy. And if they say, oh, no, everything's fine, just that you guys don't know what you're doing. And I would say, well, with respect, we do know what we're doing. And you're in denial at the moment, saying everything's right, because let's look at your figures. You have lost money for the last 6 months. And yet you're still telling me that, you don't want to be in the business or whatever the issue is you've identified. So I think respectfully putting it on the table, naming it, and then saying, now, we need to come up with a solution. I have a few thoughts here, and I'd be interested in your thoughts. So it's a collaborative discussion, but you're facing into the truth, and that'll normally give you the breakthrough. And one of the solutions may be the franchisee needs to sell, and they may need to sell at a loss. And that's the reality, because they're never going to get their money back. And again, if that's the truth, you need to explain that to them. However, I've seen cases where franchisees have wanted to sell their business. The field consultant has worked with them because they've agreed to get the best price. They've got to maximize their profitability. And suddenly they fall back in love with the business because it's starting to make money again and they're getting that satisfaction.
Thank you. Very good. Very good. So I think just end up with one more question. We just have about a minute left. I think it's a good question to end on.
Thanks everybody for the questions.
Yes, thank you. So are there any good books that you recommend or even give to new franchisees to give them a different perspective on that franchisor-franchisee relationship?
Is that a Dorothy Dix question? We call it a Dorothy, a planted question. There is, and this may sound self-serving, but in 2000, I wrote a book called Profitable Partnerships. And I poured my heart out into that book. I'd been running the business for 11 years, our business, and I'd also been a franchisee and a franchisor the 10 years prior. And I've put in that book everything a franchisee needs to know and everything a franchisor needs to know to have a collaborative working relationship. It's got the franchisee factor in it, and a lot of tips about managing change. So McDonald's and a lot of different systems give their franchisees a copy of that book when they go through the initiation stage. And that's good. Joe Matthews, I mentioned earlier, has got an excellent book, Street Smart Franchising. And Mark Siebert is also, from the iFranchise Group, has got an excellent book, more for franchisors about, setting up and developing a good franchise system.
Great. Thank you very much, Greg. So it's 1:45. I think we're at the end of our session here, but I thank you very much for joining us today. We were so excited to have you. Looking forward to the Franchise Relations Summit. And everybody, you're going to be getting a survey that you participated in this call. And please, respond to our survey. Let us know what you thought. And we look forward to seeing you at convention. Greg, do you have anything else to say?
I hope people come along to the Franchise Relations Summit. I personally guarantee it's going to be a rewarding and useful experience for you.
Great.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.